Hello, it's great to be here in magnificent Delhi for the Raisina Dialogue. My name is Beck, I'm the Executive Director of Trobe Asia, and I will be moderating this event on combining growth and security in the Indo-Pacific. And I'm delighted to be joined by Nilanthi, who is the Director of Strategy, Policy and Analysis at the Centre for Naval Analyses, and Jeff, who is a partner at Eversheds Sutherland law firm, and the former Deputy Undersecretary of Defence for the United States. So welcome to both of you. I just want to begin quite broadly by considering some of the key issues, what you consider to be the key issues in the Indo-Pacific during the 21st century that affect the relationship between economic growth and prosperity and development on the one hand, and national security and regional security on the other. I might turn to you first, Nilanthi. What are the sort of really pressing issues at this time in the 21st century that affects that kind of relationship between these two objectives?
Sure. I think, first of all, it's important to recognize that a lot of these developing countries in the Indo-Pacific, really meeting their national development goals and hitting those targets is a priority. And they're essentially smaller powers, so they feel, I think, many times often left behind and are feeling a need to race to try to meet some of those goals. So you see almost an insatiable desire for infrastructure, such as building ports or upgrading port infrastructure, building roads, railways, highways. So that's definitely a key issue, that desire to meet national development goals. But at the same time, while that's a domestic driver, there is an international development context in which they find themselves, particularly with regard to development finance. And these countries, they're becoming middle income. So as they rise and become a middle income country, they find themselves losing access to concessionary assistance. So that raises some of the concerns that have come up with regard to this Chinese debt diplomacy and debt trap discussion that has been in the strategic discourse for a while now. And then, of course, the concern is that somehow China would be able to use some of this port infrastructure or some of these other projects to somehow leverage influence. So it's really the convergence of those trends that has observers concerned.
Thank you. And Jeff, I mean, what are your feelings about the sort of the key issues at the moment and into the future in terms of this relationship between growth on the one hand and national security on the other?
Sure, thanks, and a pleasure to be here at the Raisina Dialogue and to talk with you about these issues. One aside, there was some discussion this morning about the Persian Gulf and whether or not the Persian Gulf is part of the Indo-Pacific. I would just be remiss as an American and former defense official if I didn't point out that we heard from the foreign minister of Iran this morning, who seemed to want to lay the problems of the region on the feet of everybody but Iran. And it's hard for me to understand how a country that has exported terrorism, has destabilized a lot of the region, and has persecuted its own people doesn't bear some responsibility. That said, this is largely Indo-Pacific, not about Iran. It is about big powers. We also heard from the foreign minister of Russia this morning, who said the Indo-Pacific U.S. strategy is about containing China. And what I would say to that is there is no doubt China is a preeminent factor in establishing that strategy. It's not as much about containment, but it's about creating a region that's free from economic coercion and free from hegemony, where sovereign nations and their companies can compete and prosper. And China is welcome to compete and prosper in that. So it's not about containment in that sense, but it is about preventing pernicious practices, policies, and strategies that are designed to subjugate the region in infrastructure terms and other terms. So I would say that security and growth can coexist, because security sets the framework in which companies, nations, and countries can compete economically in the region with open sea lanes and freedom.
So Nilanthi, you mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, and I'd really like to hear a bit more about your feelings about the Belt and Road Initiative, because as you mentioned, there is a lot of concern about what Beijing is doing, the security implications of the so-called debt trap diplomacy. I mean, do you share this concern? Do you see the Belt and Road Initiative as a security, a security approach that China is taking, or is it about economics, or is this a kind of overstated or overplayed concern? What are your feelings about the Belt and Road?
Well, I'm not a China analyst, so I can't speak from that perspective, but looking from within the region, the Belt and Road Initiative, it's one of multiple approaches or options that these countries can pursue as they try to meet national development goals and create or upgrade infrastructure in their countries, because they see infrastructure as really their ticket to regional and global trading networks, and that's how they can bring in revenue to the country. So there's China, of course, but then there's also other options like Japan, the United States, multilateral development banks. So I think from their perspectives, China is one of a host of options.
And Jeff, what are your feelings about the Belt and Road Initiative in terms of that relationship between security and economic growth?
Well, I think the Belt and Road Initiative is one element of what I call the China narrative. It's a series of approaches and strategies China has taken to achieve significant economic growth and leadership in high technology, and through that, military prowess. And the issue with China is that its policies have turned over recent years in a way that are antithetical to not only American but the rest of the region's interests in many ways. Their approach to the South China Seas, for example. And so from that standpoint, it's troubling. The issue is not the narrative per se, because I think there's ample support for it. The issue is what to do about it. And
so if I can ask about what to do about it, I mean, what can the United States and its regional allies and partners do to manage these dynamics, to sort of deal with the Belt and Road Initiative? Before we went on air, we were talking about the Quad, the relationship between India, Japan, Australia and the United States. So it would be great to hear what your thoughts are about the Quad as a security dialogue or alliance, and how that might be strengthened to deal with some of these security concerns.
Well, I think what the U.S. has done, and I do agree with the administration's approach, they've spent a lot of time investing in those Quad countries in terms of bilateral relationships. Here we are in India, and the U.S. has today one of the strongest relationships with India in security terms, the U.S.-Indian strategic partnership that we've had in our lifetimes, marked by arms sales, by FMS sales, by a whole range of initiatives and options, by the communications agreement that was negotiated, all of which is designed to promote great security cooperation and exercises. And we've done similar things with Japan and with Australia. What I think is needed, the next step, is to take that and build on it and build a regional security architecture with a little more formal a setting, so that we can set a framework. And this is not per se anti-China. I think we can do things with the Chinese on the low intensity side, meaning things like working together on emergency operations, working together on relief operations and things of that nature. But it is designed to avoid some of the practices and policies the Chinese have undertaken that are problematic. So I think from a security standpoint, that's one thing. On the economics, the U.S. has engaged on somewhat different approach, which I question the full merits of, which is essentially to decouple from China in terms of high technology and trade, from a standpoint that we want to deny China the tools of technology that could be used to our detriment and those of our allies. I think in the world where China is going to play a significant role in the world economy going forward, no matter what we do, I think you could do that in a very limited way. So for example, restrict the flow of technology on hypersonics for weapon systems. But I don't think you could do it in a broad way, and I think you have to come to terms with a China that's going to participate economically, but you have to hold their feet to the fire to do so in a way that's consistent with WTO and other regimes.
And Nilanthi, what do you feel about this idea of kind of strengthening the Quad? I mean, is there the political will within these countries to take it to the next level, or do you think that there is still reluctance in states like India to really commit to that, particularly, so coming from an Australian perspective, there is a hesitance to be seen to be actively containing China, and this sort of suggestion of a formalised security alliance would probably be interpreted as part of the China narrative as being a containment strategy. So do you see that this is an option, or is there still a way to go to get these 4 states and potentially other states in the region on board for a full formalised security structure?
Well, there's definitely been a revitalization of the Quad since it faded, I would say, more than a decade ago. So that is a tangible step forward in terms of the direction of this grouping. But yes, there has been some reluctance, particularly from the Indian side. Some of the terminology to refer to this grouping, quadrilateral consultations, there's been a little bit of a softening. So I don't think all 4 states are yet on the same page in terms of what the approach should be, but there is this consultation. So that is still a step forward, but perhaps not as far ahead as perhaps maybe the other countries in this grouping would like. But I think what's more important is what are these countries going to actually do? Mm-hmm. So we have seen particularly the United States take a more strategic approach and modernize its development finance tools. This was a highlight of the National Security Strategy that came out in 2017. So the Belt and Road Initiative has certainly caused concerns, and to the extent that it actually has awakened a strategic sensibility in the United States and some of these other countries. Now these Quad countries, perhaps just individually or nationally, they are responding. So this setting up of the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, making this concerted approach to modernize development finance. From the United States, we've seen Japan work together now with the European Union for infrastructure projects. So, and of course, the United States and Australia working together on infrastructure. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the Quad grouping strictly, but we are seeing initiatives by these countries at the national level, bilaterally. Also, Japan and India, their Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, that initiative, which is seen as a response to the Belt and Road Initiative because it does emphasize greater transparency and sustainability and good governance of projects. So all of these countries, I think collectively, they're working to try to improve the situation and respond to some of the concerns that have arisen due to the Belt and Road Initiative.
So are you optimistic, Jeff, that these like-minded, the so-called like-minded states can really band together to mitigate some of these security challenges? What's your feeling about looking into the future?
Yeah, I'm bullish on the security side in particular because I think we've laid a lot of groundwork in the last couple of years, and I give this administration credit for building on what the Obama administration did. I think there's really been a kind of a national consensus in the United States on this, and we've, as I said, there have been significant U.S. investments made with each of these regional partners, and they've done their own bit to strengthen their own capabilities militarily, and so I think I'm bullish there, and I think while it's still all countries may not be together on taking the Quad and expanding it out security-wise, it's a lot less of a push than it was 4 years ago, and I think that's what leadership is about. And I think it looks to the United States to begin to move that in that direction, and we have. On the economic side, I'm less bullish because I think we are sorting through what to do with China, frankly, and we've done it probably too much unilaterally and not enough on a regional basis with our allies. And we're basically going to countries and saying, look, we need you with us on 5G, it's our way or the highway. We need you with us on foreign investment and 5G, meaning in 5G telecom, not including any technology or services from China. We need you on foreign investment to restrict Chinese foreign investment in these high-tech industries. It's our way or the highway. And I do think that hasn't resonated that well. So I think there's work to be done there.
Oh, there's plenty of food for thought. It's been terrific talking to Nilanthi and Jeff. That's all we have time for, so thank you for tuning in.